This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. North Korea has test-fired a pair of ballistic missiles with a potential range of striking Japan in a possible protest of Tokyo's adoption of a new security strategy to push for more offensive footing against North Korea and China. The launches come 2 days after the North claimed to have performed a key test needed to build a more mobile, powerful intercontinental ballistic missile designed to strike the U.S. mainland. South Korea and Japan condemned the North's latest missile launches. A giant Hanukkah menorah was lit in downtown Kyiv on Sunday, the day after massive Russian rocket attacks on Ukraine. According to Vitaly Klitschko, Kyiv mayor, it's the tallest menorah in Europe. Klitschko said during the lighting ceremony, quote, "Just the day before yesterday, the aggressor tried again to leave us without water, without heat, and without light. And today, by lighting the tallest menorah in Europe, we are showing that the light always wins." The ceremony on the first night of Hanukkah was attended by U.S., German, Canadian, French, Polish, Greek, and Japanese ambassadors to Ukraine. Fans in Buenos Aires celebrated as Lionel Messi finally won the biggest prize in soccer as Argentina beat France 4-2 in a penalty shootout to claim a third World Cup. Despite Kylian Mbappe scoring the first hat trick in a final in 56 years, Argentina won after a 3-3 draw. Lionel Messi's once-in-a-generation career is now complete now that he's finally a World Cup champion. He's definitely among soccer's greatest ever players alongside Pele and Diego Maradona. Find more at voanews.com. This is VOA News. Iraqi officials say an explosive device went off in the country's north, killing at least 9 members of the federal police force who were on patrol. A military spokesman says an officer with the rank of major was among the fatalities in the attack on Friday. No one immediately claimed responsibility for the attack. The spokesman said that the Iraqi prime minister had been briefed about the attack and that an investigation was underway. The United Nations Sunday marks International Migrants' Day to commemorate the contributions of hundreds of millions of migrants who have faced challenges to leave home for a better life. Lisa Schlein reports for VOA from Geneva.
The United Nations says most of the world's 280 million international migrants have been forced to move by conflict, persecution, desperate poverty, and increasingly climate change. Many migrants who lack legal pathways take dangerous routes to countries of asylum. Many are exploited, abused, and die along the way. The International Organization for Migration estimates more than 50,000 migrants have died, and thousands more have disappeared over the past 8 years. Lisa Schlein for VOA News, Geneva.
At least 19 people were killed and 32 injured when a fuel tanker exploded in a tunnel north of the Afghan capital, Kabul, a local official said Sunday. A spokesman for Parwin province said Saturday night's tunnel explosion killed at least 19 people, including women and children. He said survivors remained trapped under the rubble and that the number of casualties could rise. Tunisian opposition figures have called for the president's resignation after disastrous parliamentary elections in which less than 9% of voters cast ballots. The mass voter disavowal was a dramatic development for the birthplace of the Arab Spring uprisings against autocratic leaders a decade ago. Tunisia is the only country to emerge from that upheaval with a new democratic political system. The elections Saturday were meant to replace a legislature that President Kais Saied dissolved last year. The election results are expected in the coming days. Streets in major Chinese cities were eerily quiet Sunday as people stayed home to protect themselves from a surge in COVID-19 cases that has hit urban centers from north to south. China is in the first of an expected 3 waves of COVID cases this winter, according to the country's chief epidemiologist. Follow us on the VOA mobile app. I'm Joe Ramsey, VOA.
This is VOA News. Reporting via remote, I'm Jeff Custer. Ukraine reported a fresh round of Russian drone attacks Monday, with much of the focus on the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. Reporting from Kyiv Monday, correspondent Anna Chernikova spoke with VOA's Flashpoint program about how Monday's attacks compared to a similar attack on Friday.
What I can say that the attack that happened on Friday, Russian forces mostly used missiles in addition to drones. Tonight, Russian forces used drones, and most of those drones were actually targeting the city of Kyiv. So for the moment, we know that there were in total 35 drones used, and 30 of those 35 were destroyed by the Ukrainian air defense, and just 23 of those 35 were registered over the city of Kyiv alone. And Ukrainian air defense managed to destroy 18 drones out of 23 over the city of Kyiv. And for the moment, we know that energy infrastructure was targeted, and energy infrastructure was hit.
Russian warships have set off to take part in a joint naval exercise with China, an exercise that showcases increasingly close defense ties between the two countries. The Russian Defense Ministry said Monday a total of 4 warships from Russia's Pacific Fleet left to take part in maneuvers in the East China Sea beginning Wednesday. The ministry said the Chinese Navy plans to deploy several surface warships and a submarine for the exercise. Moscow and Beijing have been displaying their growing military cooperation in recent months as both face tensions with the United States. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin visited Belarus Monday, along with his defense and foreign ministers, fanning fears in Kyiv that he intends to pressure his ex-Soviet ally to join a fresh ground offensive that would open a new front against Ukraine. This is VOA News. London's High Court ruled Monday Britain's plan to send illegal migrants to Rwanda is lawful. It's a victory for Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who has made a high-stakes political promise to tackle the record number of migrants arriving in Britain on small boats across the English Channel. Reuters correspondent Rachel Graham reports.
Judges said it was consistent with the Refugee Convention for Britain to make arrangements with the Rwandan government to send asylum seekers to the country more than 4,000 miles away. Asylum claims would then be determined in Rwanda. Figures show a record number of more than 40,000 migrants have come from France this year, many having made the journey from Afghanistan, Iran, or other countries suffering war. After the ruling, Britain's Interior Minister, Suella Braverman, said the government's focus is now on proceeding with the deportation policy as soon as possible, adding that it was ready to defend against any further legal challenges. The Rwandan government welcomed the court's decision, with a spokeswoman saying her country is ready to offer migrants the chance to build a new life, though the government victory will not mean flights can take off straight away, because there may be further appeals in British courts.
That's Reuters correspondent Rachel Graham reporting. The U.S. House of Representatives' January 6 committee Monday will wrap up its investigation into the violent insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. Associated Press correspondent Donna Warder reports.
The panel's 7 Democrats and 2 Republicans are expected today to recommend that the Justice Department consider criminal charges against former President Donald Trump and possibly associates and staff who helped him launch a campaign to try to overturn the 2020 presidential election. The criminal referral is symbolic for the most part, and the panel will dissolve on January 3rd with the new Republican-led House. The panel's conclusion: that Trump is to blame for the violent attack on the Capitol by his supporters. Donna Warder, Washington.
Police in Canada's Ontario province said Monday 6 people, including a 73-year-old suspect, died, and 1 person was seriously injured in a shooting at a residential building in the city of Vaughan in Canada's Ontario province Sunday night. Authorities have not released more information about the victims, the suspect, or the suspect's motive. The York Regional Police Department said police responded to a call of an active male shooter who had several victims at a condominium in Vaughan, about 31 kilometers from Toronto, at about 7:20 local time Sunday. Special Investigations Unit spokesperson Christy Dant said the suspect, who used a semi-automatic handgun, was shot at by police and pronounced dead at the scene. Dant said the victims resided in different floors and that she believed once police arrived there was not an exchange of gunfire. Reporting via remote, I'm Jeff Custer. This is VOA News.
This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. President Vladimir Putin acknowledged on Tuesday that conditions in Russian-held areas of Ukraine were, quote, extremely difficult, while Ukraine's leader visited a shattered frontline town that has long eluded capture by Moscow. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky said he made the surprise trip to rally Kyiv's quote-unquote superhuman troops in Bakhmut, so blasted by continuous Russian shelling and brutal fighting nearby it is nicknamed the meat grinder. Zelensky arrived in the eastern town shortly after Putin told Russia's security services they need to significantly improve their work. One of his clearest public admissions yet, the invasion he launched almost 10 months ago is not going to plan. Two main subway stations in Kyiv reopened in the Ukrainian capital for the first time since the war began nearly 10 months ago, the AP's Ed Donahue reports.
Independence Square, Maidan, and Krechevik are key transfer stations of the Kyiv subway system. They've been closed since the start of the war, forcing thousands of commuters to go outside and walk to the nearest station to transfer to other lines. All the metro stations in Kyiv work as shelters when there are air raid sirens. Denis Kapustin says, yes, this is a feeling that despite everything, we are coming back to the routine that we were used to. This is very important, very important. The stations are considered one of the safest places in Kyiv when there is a risk of a missile attack. I'm Ed Donahue.
Thousands of fans flocked to Buenos Aires streets on Tuesday to join the celebrations of the FIFA World Cup victory in the city. The Argentine capital has been in party mode since the dramatic victory over France in Sunday's final in Qatar. Around midday, hundreds of thousands congregated in downtown Buenos Aires. This is VOA News. Afghanistan's Taliban-run higher education ministry on Tuesday suspended access to universities by female students until further notice, drawing strong condemnation from the United States, Britain, and the United Nations. Foreign governments, including the United States, have said that a change in policies on women's education is needed before it can consider formally recognizing the Taliban-run administration, which is also subject to heavy sanctions. In March, the Taliban drew criticism from many foreign governments and some Afghans for making a U-turn on signals all-girls high schools would be opened. An exemption to allow the United Nations and aid groups to deal with sanctioned Taliban leaders to meet humanitarian and basic human needs of the Afghan people has helped save lives, the UN aid chief told the UN Security Council on Tuesday.
I cannot overstate how essential this legal cover has been for humanitarian and commercial actors alike. It allows us, the humanitarians, to implement at scale, and it authorizes our business and commercial partners.
UN aid chief Martin Griffiths said aid operations had been boosted by a quick and generous response from donors and that a UN cash facility had transferred some $1.8 billion into Afghanistan to support humanitarian operations, but he still painted a dire picture. Thailand's military rescue teams on Tuesday raced against time to find survivors after a Navy ship sank at the weekend in choppy waters. Reuters correspondent Lauren Anthony reports.
Thailand's Navy discovered the bodies of 6 Marines on Tuesday after a small warship sank in treacherous waters at the weekend. Around 24 Marines were still unaccounted for by Tuesday afternoon. Some of those missing were without life vests. Dozens were forced to abandon the HTMS Sokho Thai late on Sunday after it was knocked over by 13-foot waves and strong winds. The US-made corvette, in use since 1987, was carrying 105 military personnel. Most were saved before the boat sank, but dozens had to abandon ship in rafts and life jackets.
The Tunisian government has raised the price of drinking water by up to 23%, the official Gazette said on Tuesday, as the country seeks to reduce subsidies to qualify for IMF help. Tunisia, which has a shortage of water after years of drought, is under pressure from the International Monetary Fund to cut government subsidies, including of energy, food, and water, to qualify for a recovery package that the country needs to save finances from collapse. I'm Joe Ramsey.
Air raid sirens blared across Ukraine Wednesday, officials said, but there was no immediate word of a new wave of attacks. This as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was making his way to the United States to meet President Joe Biden, address Congress, and seek weapons in his first overseas trip since Russia invaded his country. Zelensky said the visit was aimed at strengthening Ukraine's resilience and defense capabilities amid repeated Russian attacks on energy and water supplies in the dead of winter. Russian troops are hunting Ukrainians by name using lists prepared with the help of their intelligence services. AP correspondent Charles de Ledesma has more.
An Associated Press probe has found in a deliberate widespread campaign, Russian forces systematically target influential Ukrainians nationally and locally to neutralize resistance through detention, torture and executions. In the crosshairs are government officials, journalists, activists, veterans, religious leaders and lawyers. About a week after the first Russian bombs struck Ukraine, Andrei Kuprash, a village head, got a threatening call from an unknown number. "We will find you," the man said in Russian. The hunt was on. The strategy appears to violate the laws of war and could help build a case for genocide. I'm Charles de Ledesma.
Russian President Vladimir Putin vowed Russia would fulfill all the goals of its military campaign in Ukraine as he heralded Russian soldiers and defense chiefs as heroes in a speech in Moscow. He was speaking at an end-of-year meeting of Russia's top defense chiefs. Putin said the NATO military alliance was using its full capabilities against Russia and urged the assembled military leaders to use their experience gained in fighting in Syria. This is VOA News. Former U.S. President Donald Trump paid no income tax during the final full year of his presidency as he reported a loss from his sprawling business interests, according to tax figures released by a congressional panel. The records, released late on Tuesday by the Democratic-led House of Representatives Ways and Means Committee after a years-long fight, show that Trump's income and his tax liability fluctuated dramatically during his 4 years in the White House. The records cut against the Republican's long-cultivated image as a successful businessman as he mounts another White House bid. Millions of Americans could lose their Medicaid coverage under the budget proposal before U.S. Congress. AP correspondent Donna Warder has more.
During the pandemic, states were prohibited from booting people off Medicaid because of the public health emergency. But the $1.7 trillion spending package congressional leaders have unveiled would sunset that requirement, and states could start kicking people off Medicaid as early as April, as long as the enrollees are notified first. Under the budget proposal, the federal government would also wind down extra funds given to states for those additional enrollees. The Senate is expected to vote on the spending bill first, and Democrats are looking for support from at least 10 Republican senators to pass the measure before sending it to the House. Donna Warder, Washington.
Texas dispatched National Guard troops to the border and San Diego businesses anticipated a wave of Christmas shoppers from Mexico, as tens of thousands of asylum seekers at the border waited for a Supreme Court ruling that could allow them to enter the United States. The U.S. government asked the Supreme Court not to lift the limits before Christmas in a filing a day after Chief Justice John Roberts issued a temporary order to keep the pandemic-era restrictions in place. Before Roberts issued that order, they had been slated to expire Wednesday. The World Health Organization says it's concerned about a spike in COVID-19 infections in China. VOA's Marissa Melton has that story.
The head of the World Health Organization says the WHO is supporting the Chinese government in its efforts to vaccinate people at the highest risk across the country. Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus told reporters that the WHO is very concerned about the evolving situation in China. Infections have recently spiked in the world's second largest economy, and projections have suggested China could face an explosion of cases and more than 1 million deaths next year. Marissa Milton, VOA News.
For more on these and all the stories we're covering today, visit us at voanews.com. From Washington via remote, Diane Roberts, VOA News.
Best music now. VOA 1.